Finally, I should thank the Mellon Foundation for their generous support of the seminar. So I'm going to introduce our introducer tonight before the talk, and it is my deep honor to introduce Professor Amy Lonetree, who will in turn introduce Dr. Karina Walters this evening. Professor Lonetree is an enrolled citizen of the Ho-Chunk Nation and a professor of history here at UC Santa Cruz. She received her PhD in ethnic studies from the University of California, Berkeley, and her scholarly research focuses on 20th century Native American history, public history, and museum studies. Her publications include Decolonizing Museums, Representing Native America in National and Tribal Museums, a co-edited book entitled The National Museum of the American Indian, Critical Conversations, and a co-authored volume, People of the Big Voice, Photographs of Ho-Chunk Families by Charles Van Schaik, 1879 to 1942. So it is now my deep honor to hand the floor over to Professor Lonetree.
Thank you, Jennifer. I am honored to introduce this evening Dr. Karina Walters, and she is the recently appointed director of the Tribal Health Research Office at the National Institute of Health. She's an enrolled citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, a Catherine Hall Chambers University professor at the University of Washington School of Social Work, and an adjunct professor in the Department of Global Health, School of Public Health, and co-director of the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute at the University of Washington. Dr. Walters is world-renowned for her expertise in developing behavioral and multi-level health interventions steeped in culture to activate health-promoting behaviors. She has written landmark papers on traumatic stress and health, historical and intergenerational trauma, and originated the Indigenous stress coping model. She has led 22 NIH-funded studies, is one of the leading American Indian scientists in the country, and it is only one of 2 American Indians and the only Native woman ever invited to deliver the prestigious Director's Lecture to the Wednesday afternoon lecture series at the National Institute of Health. And she is the first American Indian Fellow inducted into the American Academy of Social Welfare and Social Work. And I also want to take a moment and mention that she is a much beloved mentor, and she has trained the next generation of social welfare scholars, and so many of them that I've had the privilege of meeting and talking with over the years sing her praises. So Dr. Walters has helped build a field, and we are indebted to her and very grateful to have her here with us this evening. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Walters.
Well, halito sahachiva hatupichi gancha spo chibiti hoyo mitra chatas yoke mitra yokoke okla indigenous lands here. I wanted to acknowledge. Good afternoon. My name is Karina Walters. I'm enrolled in the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and it's an honor to be here and be able to share this with you. I should say this is my last lecture before I move on into my new role at the NIH. So anything that is shared tonight does not reflect the views of the federal government, and they're solely my own. And again, I do want to pay my respect to the Mutsun tribal band here in whose territory we are in, and in so doing also acknowledging my ancestors. I greeted you in our Choctaw language. Originally, my family and ancestors come from Moundville, Alabama. If we go back to ancient Mississippian times, that's actually, I'm a direct descendant from Moundville. And I'm sharing this slide here because I also grew up in Los Angeles, and you know, I always hear about urban Indians and like, oh, you guys have it so hard, you know, you're in the city. Well, I just want to point out that we've had cities before. But this is Cahokia, for example, you know, estimates of anywhere from 24 to 40,000, sometimes 70,000 estimates of people living there with a very sophisticated urban landscape, right? So it's the conditions under which we live now in urban settings that has to do with settler colonialism that changes this conversation. So I just want to kind of highlight that. This is our ancient mound out at Nanawaya. We have our stories of emerging from that mound as well as migrating to that place. And also I bring my ancestors to this territory, and I just want to pay my respects and honor them as well. And of course, you know, I got to have a picture of my daughter here as well. I'm going to talk about historical trauma and some of the work that we've been doing on developing culturally based and derived interventions in collaboration with our communities. And I'm going to share it through the four elements. So I'm going to start with water. I'm going to talk about land, air, wind, and fire. And so to start off, before I get into historical trauma, I want us to think about water. And the reason for that is when you take a sip of this water, I want you to think about this. Where does water come from? Right? It rises to the heavens and it comes back down. It never leaves us. It's always here, right? It goes up and it comes back down. Now, why is this important? You know, water to us, you know, we've had water as life movement, water as medicine. Majority of the earth is water. Majority of our bodies are made up of water. We're birthed from our mother's waters. Water is really powerful, right? So when you take a sip of that water, I want you to think about your lips are touching the same water that your ancestors' lips touched. In this moment, when you're taking a sip, you're directly connected to your ancestors. What a powerful connection and relationship. So too, when we think about historical trauma, there's things that our ancestors have that we still carry and that are still connected to, and we literally can carry that in our bodies. And there's some epigenetic research that's starting to come out around that. So literally, we still carry those stories. We may not be conscious of those stories, but even those stories can be expressed in different kinds of ways. But I want you to think about historical trauma slightly differently and not focus so much on the drama of the trauma, but I want you to think about love. Because historical trauma is actually about love, and I'm going to tell you why. In this moment, I am my great-great-great-great-grandmother's granddaughter. In this moment, I am my great-great-great-granddaughter's grandmother. In this moment, I'm all of those things. So if I take action for myself and I begin to heal myself and work towards that healing, I'm not just affecting myself, but I'm affecting many generations forward. I'm not just affecting the many generations forward, I'm getting the opportunity to correct any hurts that I still carry in my body that my ancestors didn't get to correct. In this moment, that means that's a great place of power. It's not about disempowerment like we talk about a lot in health care settings. It's actually about power. It's about love, and it's about love because my ancestors, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, we are all the descendants of those who survived the Trail of Tears. I know Cherokees get all the credit for that, but the reality is we were the first to go on the trail, and we were decimated by that experience. But our ancestors did not survive that Trail of Tears for us to be hurting the way we are today. They walked that Trail of Tears with a vision, with love in their heart, with imagining a future for us that would be different than some of the stuff we're dealing with today, right? So when I talk about historical trauma, it's about those three elements. It's about power, it's about vision, what is the vision that they carried for us that we can reconnect to, and it's about love. How do we honor that love and move that forward? How do we pay that forward for future generations and current communities now? Okay, so that's what I want us to think about when I'm talking about historical trauma. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the struggles around historical trauma momentarily, but I also want to talk a little bit about the status of Native women. And we don't get a lot of attention with respect to some of these histories. And you can think about all kinds of stories about whether they're stories about corn women or buffalo calf women or thought women. There's different kinds of women figures in all of our societies. My tribe, it's matrilineal, matrilocal originally. Women, the woman, we call her unknown woman, she was a very, very powerful woman for us, and we have many others as well, which I could talk about. But for women, we are the seers, we are the teachers, we are the ones who are the life bearers, we're the ones who, in my tribe, we're responsible for literally righting the wrongs when something happens. If we're in disequilibrium, we're actually in charge of those ceremonies historically to restore that equilibrium. It's a very powerful place to be. And so they knew that. The colonizers knew that when they came in, and it was very concerted effort to attack the structure of family and women as a way to break down social organization. A good example was green corn ceremony. We controlled all the economy. The women controlled the economy. If you got rid of green corn ceremony, which women were really the key controllers of, then you began to break down our systems of organization as a social people. So this is really important to acknowledge, because when we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, when we talk about, you'll see a little bit of what I'm going to highlight here, this is not new. This is not new. And so now we have an opportunity to make some of these changes and really bring it to light, and I'm really excited about that. I want to start with and I'm going to talk about historical trauma. I want to talk about a big theme in my talk is we have stories and original instructions embedded in these stories about how to live well and how to live healthfully. And I'm going to share with you a story of Apanukvala. This is not my story. This comes from the family of Dr. Michelle Johnson Jennings, a colleague of mine who's Choctaw. She's given us permission to share that story. But Apanukvala is a story of whirlwind. And a long time ago, there was a powerful female warrior, and she was an incredible hunter, and she was an orphan along with her brother, and she was responsible for teaching him and working on his hunting skills and taking care of the family. This was her job. She used to go out hunting in the forest, and one day she went out hunting into the forest. And as she was gone, it was typical to be gone for a couple of days. Her younger brother grew a little bit worried because she hadn't quite returned, and it was the same time this massive storm came in, a giant tornado. Like, they've never seen anything like this before. They hadn't seen tornadoes before, and it came and it wiped out this whole town. And he became distraught. He went looking into the woods to look for Apanukvala, and that wasn't her name at the time, but he went to look for her. And he heard her crying up in the hollow of a tree. And she was crying, and she said, brother, stay away, I'm a spirit, I've turned into a spirit. And he said, what happened? How could you have turned into a spirit? She said, well, I was out here hunting, but I was attacked by men in this village, and I was assaulted. And my rage was so great, I turned into a spirit, and I took vengeance, and I wiped out their village. And I'm afraid I'm going to harm others, so stay away, I don't want to harm you, I don't want to hurt you. And he said, well, what can I do to help you heal? This is horrible, what can I do? She goes, I don't know, I'm a spirit, I'm not sure what I can do. And he said, well, what can I do? And she said, listen, I'm going to transfer all my hunting power to you. And she gave him the power of hunting. And you will become a powerful hunter. Just let me be. I'll be fine. He couldn't walk away knowing that she was going to be okay. He would come out and leave her food every once in a while. Meanwhile, he became a great hunter, and he became quite the bachelor for the communities. Everyone wanted to hook up with, this guy, because he was a really good hunter. And so he had lots of proposals for potential partners in life. And he came back and he told her of his feats, and she said, oh, I'm so happy for you, and she said, I'm kind of lonely myself. And he said, well, will that help you heal if I find a partner for you? And she said, yes, would that, maybe. And so he went into the village, met with a potential partner, and got the blessings of her uncle, and they kind of walked off, and he said, well, I kind of have a deal here. It's not really me I want to marry, wants to marry you, but maybe my sister. Would you be open to that? And she said, okay, but on my terms, I have to meet her. If it's a match, I got to see. So she met Apanukvala, who was up in the tree, finally came down, they met, and, they fell in love. And so the brothers said, okay, we're good. And over time, Apanukvala still continued to roam the prairies, turning up the ground, but he noticed a shift in her, and she said, you know what, I've discovered, through this love, my trauma has turned into healing, and now I just turned the earth over, and my job is to continue. I'm a spirit, so I got to stay a spirit, but now I just continue to turn the earth over for renewal and growth. So that's the story we have. And it's interesting because Apanukvala really tells us about regeneration, the ability to transform trauma and to have it become regenerative, and it's through love. And it has a two-spirit element to it too, which you don't quite often hear in our story. So it reminds us of the transformative power of love and relationality and healing from trauma. And this is really important because women, 1 out of 3 of our Native women are sexually assaulted. Are expected to be raped in their lifetime, but higher than that in terms of sexual assault. In one of my studies, 85% of the Two-Spirit women had been sexually assaulted. Incredibly high rates, right? But we need to move, and again, I'm trying to move us away from a deficit-oriented approach. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about land. And I'm sorry, if I talk quickly, it's because I have a lot of information to share, but if I'm talking too quickly, just wave your hand and I'll slow it down a little bit, okay? Also, I had a lot of coffee today, so. Okay, so I'm going to talk about historical trauma, but I can't talk about historical trauma without talking about settler colonialism. It's so important to set that as a context. U.S. settler colonialism literally consists of the structures and policies and practices that facilitate land dispossession, to take away land, right? And erase the native people's ties to that land. And there's all kinds of ways that erasure can happen. It could be through genocide, or it could be through rendering people invisible and completely ignoring them. It's important to know, though, structural colonialism is a structure. It's not an event, and people get these things confused. Historically traumatic events are the events that uphold structural colonial policy, settler colonial policies. So these are the events that uphold this. So turning to settler colonialism, and you know, it has several functions, right? It's designed to distort historical realities, to basically free future settler generations from guilt and accountability, and to rationalize and normalize continuous occupation and land dispossession of settler colonial people. And if you erase people from the land, you can create news stories related to that land that supports continued occupation and supports continued structures. Think Thanksgiving, right? That's a good example. There's almost like a sense of, oh, here, come take my land and we'll have some turkey together, right? And that there's a little bit of those kinds of stories that are done to literally to erase and replace is the function of that. So to give you a couple of examples of that, you know, slavery. Let's talk a little bit about slavery. A lot of people don't pay attention to American Indian slavery. As a matter of fact, I remember in my own textbook in high school, I remember reading that we were not good slaves, which I felt offended at on a number of weird levels. You know, it was strange that I was like, wait a minute, we work hard, what are you saying? Why am I rooting for this? This is not right. But there was a part of me that felt like something was being erased and I didn't understand what it was. And so, you know, just to give you an example, like by 1661, slavery was legal in the 9 colonies, and it was an activity that by the 1700s, and especially the early 1700s, the Indian slave trade in the colonies was the primary economic activity. You don't hear about that in most of your school books, right? So to give you an idea of how much it's erased, you know, if you were to take a wild guess, how many Native people were sold into slavery? What would you guess? 10,000? Okay.
75,000.
Maybe 75,000? Yeah, those are reasonable to think that. It's actually 2.5 to 5 million. No one talks about this. My tribe was decimated. The Chickasaws raided us and sold us. We were part of the Goose Creek men, that whole triangle trade. We were mostly women and children were targeted, by the way, and we were sent to plantations in Cuba. We were part of the sugarcane trade. We ended up in even Europe, in England. But people don't talk about this, right? So this is the erasure. So everything, and I love Eve Tuck's quote on this in Wing, she says, everything within a settler colonial society strains to destroy or assimilate the native in order to disappear them from land. And this is how a society can have multiple competing messages about native people, right? We're either all dead or we're living in faraway places, and that contemporary native people are less indigenous than prior indigenous people. And better yet, all of us must be a little bit Indian, right? It's all a form of erasure. It's, again, to maintain a certain narrative. So these events are historically traumatic events are events that target a collective in order to uphold these policies. And to give you an example, they do 3 main things. They're designed to eradicate a people, either through genocide, eradicate lifeways, a form of ethnocide, right? Or eradicate thoughtways, even how we think and talk about ourselves, right? And these are collective experiences. And by the way, most historically traumatic events are not one-off events. There are a series of events that occur over generations. And just to give you a couple of examples of going back to William Cleft, you know, he basically said it's okay to enslave people and sell them into slavery. But what's interesting, he also said it was okay for colonial men to rape and enslave Native women or children. And this is a part of the the history that you also don't hear about. And let's talk about California, and I'm not going to belabor this too long, but California Native communities here suffered many massacres, especially starting in the 1840s, all the way up to the turn of the century. And it's interesting, I'm going to go up to this guy. Peter Hardeman was California's first governor. And he was actually a person who really allowed for this and promoted for this to happen. He literally said, quote, that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct. Must be expected. While we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power of wisdom of man to avert. And he said he gave, he allowed for people to produce scalps and you would be rewarded. So over 100,000 Native people in California died during the first 2 years of the gold rush alone. And by 1873, there was an estimate of only about 30,000 Native people remaining. At least 16,000 murders were actually documented during that time and actually targeting the collective. And then I just want to point out boarding school is a major historically traumatic event. In the 1880s, the federal government decided we were Native enough to be able to we were human enough to now be teachable. And this was a form of ethnocide to systematically destroy our culture and lifeways and put Native kids in these boarding schools in the 1880s. And there's more to that, but basically the idea was to kill the Indian to save the man, and it was a situation with incredible abuses across many schools. And of course, in terms of Native women, these schools were also primarily with the goal and intention of getting rid of Native practices and replacing them with Christianity and patriarchy, as you can see from that picture there. And I'm not going to, do you guys know enough about boarding schools at this point? I don't need to talk too much more about that. Just to say that this is not just kind of ideological and this has an impact on people's well-being. We actually have done research on it, and we did, just to kind of summarize it really quickly, basically we spent a long time trying to show historically traumatic events in previous generations can still potentially have an impact on present generations. It's hard to do that kind of research, but what we did is statistically basically isolate out any other kinds of confounding factors that would explain mental health. So things like we controlled for actual combat exposure, military combat exposure, because that would cause PTSD, right? And we controlled for one's own sexual and physical lifetime trauma. We controlled for your own historically traumatic event exposure in your lifetime. We said, okay, if we control for all of that, do we still have an impact of previous generations, chronicity of events over time? Does that impact PTSD and substance use? And the answer was yes. We did see that it did still, even after controlling for that. But we're still here. And so I want us to walk away with 3 things to think about, and this is how we develop our programs. So historical trauma and settler colonialism is designed to do 3 things. It's designed to disrupt our ability to fulfill our original instructions as a people, right? When General Sheridan said, let's kill the buffalo, he wasn't saying, let's disrupt the food source of the Lakota people. That's one intention, but it was deeper than that. He realized that it disrupted a people's ability to fulfill their obligations to Buffalo Nation and the spiritual and ceremonial and other kinds of obligations that go with that. It's a spiritual assault as much as it's a physical assault. So this disrupts our original instructions. The second thing it does, it disrupts our relational ways of being to ourselves, to our land, to our body, to future generations. That relational way of being in the world is, the attempt is to disrupt that. When you do boarding schools, you literally took kids out of families and put them in and warehouse them in militarized establishments. And it does a third thing, is it disrupts how we talk and narrate our lives and our stories. And so what we've done at the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute is to focus on developing interventions and health promotion interventions that target those 3 areas. Building interventions from our original teachings, our original instructions, restoring relational ways of being, or growing relational ways of being in the world, and restoring our lives in ways that are decolonizing and indigenizing and embrace the love and vision our ancestors held for us. To give you a brief example of an original instruction, example story, our stories, even children's stories, have ways of living healthfully in the world. So here's one from us, Hashkanaya. I'm going to give you the comic book version. Hashkanaya she's the moon. Hashi is the moon. Hashi is the star, and Hashkanaya is the moon. And sun. Sun and moon lived in this star world together with their star children, right? And back then, it was all bright all the time because they shared the sky. And you know how the sun is. Sun kind of gives up sun flares once in a while. We know about this even, in terms of studying the stars, right? Well, one day, Hashkanaya told her husband, she said, hey, if any of your little flares hit me or my children, I'm moving to the other side of the world. No, don't worry. No, that's never going to happen, Hashkanaya. And she said, okay, well, what happened? Sure enough, one day, one of those little flares hit. She took all her star children and went to the other side of the world. And that's how we have darkness. And he begged for her to come back. And she said, no, that was the deal. She said, I still love you. And so once a month, every morning, we will get together and we can have a meeting. And we will share the morning sky. But that's it. We had domestic violence prevention. We had domestic violence prevention. Another story, Dear Woman. You know about Dear Woman? Yeah, you guys are right. Who watches Res Dogs? Yeah, okay, Dear Woman. She's always kind of sexualized in a lot of stories they tell. And everyone tells a lot of fear. Oh, gotta be afraid of Dear Woman. Don't talk about Dear Woman. Dear Woman was our original sexual assault prevention activist, right? She is the one who kept control and said, hey, there's consequences if you are going to be abusive. She's going to trap you into your own thing and she's going to take you. So we had stories about that. We had Possum Woman. She carried a basket around, and we have a whole story about Chuck V. Rabbit following around trying to figure out what's in that basket until finally she showed what's in the basket. It was a man's head. Possum Woman was involved in going door to door to make sure women were safe, and if a woman was in a domestic violence relationship and she wasn't willing to leave the situation because she said, you have to go, she would take care of it for her. So yes, that's pretty intense, but that's an example of we had stories that there are consequences to these harms if they come in place. So, we're not going to propose a basket woman intervention, but we can propose ways of looking at just knowing that we had teachings about how to live healthfully and that we had protective mechanisms at the community level to ensure well-being. And how do we create those protective mechanisms now? It's communal, right? It's not individual. It's not about a family. It's not about the police. It's about community taking care of each other to ensure safety and well-being. In terms of relational restoration, I just want to give you a quick example of that. I've done work in mental health for a long time, and I worked with a colleague of mine, and if you've been in a mental health system for a really long time, you learn to be a good client. Think about it, the words like, if you ask somebody, for example, I'll give you an example that Ed used to share with me. Client walks in, and if he's been a good client for a long time, and you say, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. Quite often they don't say, hey, my name's Joe, and I'm so-and-so. They'll say, their disease. And they'll say, I'm my disease. It's very interesting. We see this with mental health. You don't see this in physical health as much. You're starting to see it with I'm diabetic, right? I'm my disease. Or you say I'm depressed, or I'm alcoholic, but you don't say I'm cancer unless that's your zodiac sign, right? So there's obviously, there's something about becoming the state that you're in that we need to kind of shake up a little bit. And so Ed would say something like, oh, okay, so you're depressed. So Joe says, oh, I'm depressed. And he says, okay, you're depressed. Tell me about that naming ceremony. That must have been a very important naming ceremony. And, Joe's like, no, there was no naming ceremony. What are you talking about? Oh, no, it was probably at a great square table. And doctors and social workers and others all gathered around, and they were all sitting there. They had a great council, and they had this conversation, and they had the sacred text called the DSM. And they opened up that text, and they said, you shall be named depressed. The guy's like, what are you talking about? This is kind of crazy. And why is that important? He's already starting to do something, right? In this kind of conversation, what you're doing is you're starting to change how you narrate your life. You're starting to restory it, right? And you're starting to realize you've been named, you've accepted a name. Why is that important? In Indian country, if you accept a name, naming ceremonies are very powerful. They tell you who you are in the world. They tell you how your community responds to you. It tells you how you walk in the world. It tells what your responsibilities are. So if you've just accepted a name, you better know all the responsibilities that go with that name, right? And then he'll push it a little bit further and he'll shift it to the relational way of thinking. He'll say, well, tell me when this depression visits you. See? Does it come at night? Does it wake you up in the middle of the night? Does he tell you things that are real negative? When does that happen? How often? Now, if you start developing a relationship with depression, what can you do when you have a relationship with something? You can divorce it. You can you can set boundaries. So that's the other piece, is that setting that boundaries is part of the recovery and the health and well-being, because colonization is designed to strip boundaries. We get to put our boundaries back in place. So you have a relational way of being. So these are just examples of how people begin to think about it differently. It's not to say that, classification systems aren't helpful. They can be very helpful. You can help you with medication and other kinds of things. So it's not saying anything against that, but rather beginning to think about how we get socialized into these systems, and we have to really, really consciously think about our indigenous ways of approaching it in those systems when we're there. So it's about dis-ease, not necessarily being your disease, right? So how we talk our story really matters, and that's an example of that. So I'm going to turn to transformation. So I had a big transformation with historical trauma that started to happen about 10 years ago. I was listening to a Native Hawaiian elder speak. And crabs in a bucket? You know about that? Do you guys know what that's used for? Fishermen will put crabs, when they capture crabs, they put them in a bucket, because when one crab tries to crawl out, the other crabs grab them and pull them back down, right? So they can't get out of the bucket. And quite often it's used as a metaphor for lateral violence in our communities or other communities. Someone's trying to get all this, and we got to pull them down and get some humility going, or other kinds of things. So so that was really interesting. He was telling that story, but he asked a really simple question. Do crabs live in a bucket? It's like, wait, what? That's right. He said, why do you accept crab behavior, that this is crab behavior? I was like, wait, what? I was like, oh, wait a minute. If I was a social worker in that crab bucket, I'd be like, come on, crabs, let's get together. Let's lift each other up. Give me your claw. We can do it. But then I realized what he was saying is that that's not crab behavior. You're accepting the bucket. I've accepted the bucket quite often when I thought about even historical trauma. Because he said, well, real crab behavior, actually, they help each other onto rocks. When they are in a healthy environment, when they are in their healthful environment, they actually lift each other up on rocks. Now, I'm sure there's a couple bad crabs there that are going to knock someone off. I have no doubt. But the reality is, when you have a healthy environment, and we know this even genomically, right? We know that it takes many generations when that epigenetic mark comes on the cellular material, when there's a major traumatic event that happens. But when the environment is healthy, guess what? It goes away. So it made me realize I need to focus more on creating healthy environments. I've been worried too much about fixing and helping people survive the bucket. And that what we need to do is do something sustainable that creates new environments for us to emerge and be healthy. And this gets back to what Albert Einstein basically said: we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. So it requires decolonizing work constantly, and going back to what is settler colonialism about, is about land. It's about land dispossession, so we need to get back to the land to think about creative solutions. And that, I'm going to close on fire and how we've done that. In my tribe many years ago, about almost 15 years ago, I was asked by the tribe to come and do some work on obesity and substance abuse prevention at the tribal level. And I said, well, how bad is it? Where are we at with the obesity issue in our communities? And the guy got, our chief of our health program got tearful. And he said, we're in a situation where by 2050, 1 out of 3 of our children are going to have type 2 diabetes. And we're going to have parents and grandparents outlive those kids. And he goes, it's a moving train. We're throwing everything at it. And we're making some dents. And I have to tell you, I went to the tribe to go look at what we're doing. And we have the best gyms. It makes gold gyms look horrible. We have the best facilities. We have the best Western trained approaches. We've created new diets and we have walkways now and paths that people can walk on. We're doing everything from structural changes all the way down to behavioral changes. We've got all of that in place, but we're seeing less than 3% change at that point. And so he said, we need to do something different. I said, well, what do you think's happening? He said, I think there's a sadness that we haven't dealt with. And the 30% that always seek services got better. But the 70% that don't continue to be really unwell. And it's that 70% we have to reach. So we have to do something different, something more culturally connected. And he says, so can you do that? And I was like, oh my God. I was thinking, that's really overwhelming. Well, first of all, I was honored. It's my tribe. I get a chance to serve my community, my people. But I actually walked away and I didn't go, let's go do a lit review. I actually walked away and I said, let me pray about it, because we needed a really different approach. And an answer came so simply and quickly, and it was, our ancestors did not walk that trail of tears for us to be dying the way we are dying. This was not the vision of love and life they had for us. We need to create a program that recommits to that vision of love and life and move forward, but we have to do it our way. We have to come up with our own Choctaw-specific health model. And Dr. Michelle Johnson-Jennings and myself and Sharon Fleming, the chief sister, we got together and we said, we propose to do that. We're going to come up with our own Choctaw health promotion model by rewalking the Trail of Tears. I know, that's not typical. You don't generally hear people say, this is how we're going to create a model. And of course, we couldn't do it the whole way because that would mean a year. But we said we were going to commit to walking the same amount of miles that our ancestors averaged per day, so 8 to 15 miles per day. And we were going to select the sites where they camped. So over 10 days, we were going to go do this. We break down camp and we camp every single day walking it. This just gives you an idea of where our tribe was originally, right? And then relocated to Oklahoma, right? So you see where we are there. That's our relocation. By the way, we're bigger than the state of Massachusetts. People don't know that. We still have tribal names for our lands. And people aren't, Oklahoma, that's Choctaw. Red people. But it doesn't mean red people in skin color. Red for us was about being a warrior, and about being a warrior was about protecting the life and love for the people. That's what that state means for us. Okay, so our leader has said, great, we proposed that we'll rewalk it, and he said, great, go do it, and you can do substance abuse prevention on the trail, and you can do this prevention and that prevention. We said, no, this is going to be different. We don't want to ask, what's the substance abuse prevention idea today? What we want to know is, what are original teachings around medicines? And if we abuse medicines, what are the consequences? And what are the corrective actions to take? We don't want to talk about suicide prevention. We want to talk about our original teachings about life and living. And if we get out of balance, how do we correct it? We were flipping the script. And that was really important. The other thing is, we said this, whatever intervention we create, it can't be about services. We've relied too much on services to the point where we go to services to get culture practically. We want culturally relevant services, but that's the Band-Aid. What we want is to build our culture within community and really make the shift there. So we're focusing on community sustainability, not services, which is a really different approach in most health programs. And we decided it has to be a land-based intervention. It has to be outdoors and on the land, not in a 50-minute session inside of a building. It has to be in the land. And this was even before we got on the trail and really discovered what it was like to be on the land. And why nature and land? Because, boy, I mean, there's a lot of it sends off all kinds of cool chemicals in your brain and your body. You're more likely to remember what you need to remember than being in a room. And so we did 2 pilot studies doing this. I'm just going to share with you a couple of pictures from it. This is Choctaw Nation. We made, and by the way, it's very much community-based participatory research, but it also was ceremonially based practice research as well. We made a commitment, my doctoral students, they were really, they're like, really? I said, if you want to go on this trail, you can go and provide support. These are my native doctoral students. Some of them were Choctaw. I said, but you have to not have alcohol or drugs. Not that you're doing anything like that. But you got to be sober for a month. And they're like, okay. But they did it. I said, we got to have our right mind. We're approaching this as ceremony as much as it is. And the idea was to wake up each morning, say our prayers, sing our songs, and say, and we had a little curriculum, but saying, you know, what can we learn today? And from Native teachings, you know, you can go out on the hill and try to have a vision or go out and do something like this. You might not get it. And we had to be prepared for that, because knowledge is earned when the time is right. We didn't approach it in a Western way, which knowledge is something to take and get, but rather it was something approached in a relational way. And you have to give of yourself to get that as well. So we were giving a little bit of ourselves. So when the elders told us to do this, they said, go march across Arkansas in June. Okay. Can I just tell you? That itself was, wow. And we asked a simple question: what is the Choctaw Road to Health? And we did great historical research. And I have to tell you, I'm with all these beautiful historians and historiographers in here, and I am literally an armchair history buff. But I have to tell you, it was such an honor to be able to go into the archives and actually hold our Trail of Tears papers. And I kid you not, this happened. I went to the Smithsonian, I asked for the boxes of the Trail of Tears documents from our tribe, from our first removal, and they had them. First of all, I was upset that they didn't require me to wear gloves, so that was a whole other thing. And they brought them out, and I opened the first box, and I grabbed the first group of commutation papers, and the first paper on top that I grabbed was my great-great-grandfather's. And I was like, tears! I was like, what? And it really brought to life what we were doing. And the other thing is we got to read journals and other things, and it actually was really important for our own healing to see this. We saw from the military perspective as well, the horrors that some of these guys also witnessed. This one guy was so upset about what he was witnessing that he used his own money to try to purchase food to try to feed people because of the starvation that was happening on the trail. He was so horrified by it. And we did research to find what was the vision that they held for us. So this is, Chief Harkins wrote in a farewell letter to the American people. He gave us a vision. I want us to, he hoped that we would would not feel the effects of the oppressive measures, and that we would live with happiness for ourselves. So we did that. We also looked at military maps of the old trails and used military grade GIS mapping to map it, because we were determined we're not going to do Google version of where the trail is and you could drive it. We want to be in the land of our ancestors and the feet of our ancestors, which took us to crazy places. And of course we didn't go in unsafe places. Sometimes it takes you onto the freeway, and we did do that. But we did sleep in the places where they slept. And one of them was actually now is a wildlife reserve, which, by the way, in the middle of June was not for the faint of heart. So we did all of that. We even did dreams. We even triangulated dreams. We asked people to keep journals for their dreams. We had 13 of us who were Choctaws who did the walk. And interestingly, it was the behavioral health women who stood up and said, we'll do it. Because if we're going to ask our community to do this, we have to go through it ourselves. And they're like, and we want to get fit. We want to get healthier. And that's where we started realizing, okay, we start with ourselves. Is anything we're doing, we have to start with making the changes ourselves. And then when you do this kind of research, amazing stories come out from the community. Two things is we were worried. We had only women coming forward to do this. And we're like, uh-oh, And that's when the elders said, no, it's fine, because you're responsible for restoring the balance. So it makes sense that women came forward. You have our blessing. That was great. Then they also, we heard stories, for example, people came forward about their family stories. And we heard stories about, we come from Choctaw and Chickasaw way back a long time ago, and we carried the bones of our ancestors of the lands we left thousands of years ago to end up in Nanawai and Mississippi. And we loved our ancestors so much we wouldn't leave them behind. We literally carried the bones of our ancestors on our backs. We had very elaborate funerary practices, so bones were very important to us. There's actually documentation in the archival research we did where people were in the streets getting drunk thinking it was the end of time. People were crying because they couldn't imagine leaving the bones of their ancestors. It was a really horrific time. And, but some women, because people sometimes buried people under their house or near their house, actually got the bones of some of their ancestors and literally ground it up and sewed it into their dresses. Now, that's the kind of stories that came out when you do that deep community. We also thought it important that we develop our own principles about how we conducted the research and with each other, even on, by the way, we had to do this for each other on the field because in 110 degrees by day 4 on the trail, you're all a little cranky. So we wanted to make sure we had good contact with each other on that trail, and we started off with that. But more importantly, we went to language speakers, and we didn't just go to Choctaw. Like, people say, oh, go talk to the language department. But we didn't want to stop there. We said, okay, what's the word for deep listening? We think it's Haklo. They're like, yeah, it's Haklo. And then we went to an elder and we said, what does Haklo mean to you? And this is literally her words. What is said is going to be important in your life. It's to remember the medicine is given to us and it's still there. That's Haklo. So it's much deeper, and that helped us frame what we needed to do. Our approach to trail is relational as well. So that ceremony part was part of the relational building to the trail. We actually, the tribe said we should do a fast, do a little fasting, as well as do a sweat right before. So literally the night before we left for the trail, we did a sweat. And also we were given instructions about how to take care of ourselves on the trail, and also reminded that our holy people and our medicine people actually took care of everything, so we don't have to feel that burden when we're on the trail, that things were already taken care of. But we had very important lessons about, making, for example, cedar tea and washing our feet and our legs every day. There were practical reasons for that too, which I discovered, because of the amount of chiggers and ticks and, because it was seed tick season. So this is us walking the trail, and we had parent-child pairs. So when we first did the trail, we did have children come with us, because we didn't know if we were going to do a parent-child intervention. We weren't sure what it was going to look like. We weren't allowed to have anyone under the age of 12 because of our IRB, because we had to be able to survive a rattlesnake or a water moccasin bite. Very unusual research, yeah. And this is us walking the trail. And so some of the things that we learned about is the importance of transforming the trauma. We, by the way, did, and I would never do this again, we did focus groups on the trail. I saw recordings of that. We sound crazy. We sound really out there. Yeah, and also I will never ask anyone to journal ever again. I'm not kidding. I'm kind of sort of kidding, but not really. Because we were participants as well. So the other thing is our research staff, I was a participant in my own study, basically in our pilot. And so we took notes and everything. I was like, by day 3, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not taking notes anymore. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm not a good participant. But anyways, beautiful stories came out that by being physically on the land and in the trail of our ancestors, stories and memories came out about talking with my colleague, Dr. Michelle Johnson-Jennings, you were talking about, the role of the Shillumbush and the Shilluk, that we had our 2 spirits that we have. And we realized that we actually had an ancient version of dealing with PTSD. And so as we began to talk on it. But there's some really incredible restoring that happened out of our qualitative data from this, that basically people realized that even in the drama of the trauma, people realized the joy. And actually being on the land helped us do that. And a good example, we had 13 Choctaw walkers, but we have 5 Native allies who went with us on that trail, and 3 white people who went with us. And all of us had very different experiences. And at one point when we got to the trail where it was, we had been walking all day the day before. It was 108 degrees. It was a 11-mile hike in open prairie, and so we got an idea of what it was like for us. So the next day we ended up at this place called in Wynne, Arkansas, and it's the ground is so deep that you can stand in it, and the trail is from so many people, thousands of people going, is over your head. We saw that trail, and it looked like a bunch of irreverent Choctaws because we started laughing and giggling and like crying and with like laughter, and our Native allies were weeping because they're like, look at how deep the trail is, blah, blah. And we had totally different experiences. And we had to have a conversation because they were upset that we were laughing. And we talked and we said, we're filled with joy because they have shelter here. We feel their shelter. We feel they had shade. They had safety. it was really interesting. So for our native allies were stuck in the pain, we connected with the joy. And that was really important. And I actually realized that when my grandmother was born, shortly a year after she arrived at, not even a year, that she arrived at Fort Towson, which means family had some love on the trail. So people did connect. So we discovered that, their love was medicine, as someone says. And a young person, she said, I heal others when I keep or make myself healthy. So there's like these insights that happen about being in place and realizing that it's not an intellectual place, but that physical place really helped. And out of those two pilots, we developed a Choctaw-specific health promotion model. It did happen. And we decided to use our ancient clan systems as a guide for behavioral change and to think about how we start with ourselves as individuals. Now, again, to flip the script, if we presented this, we decided to focus on obesity and substance use prevention. If I said, hey, let's go do obesity substance abuse prevention, do you want to participate? No. But if I say, hey, let's get together. We got all these issues in our community, including substance use and obesity and a bunch of things. But we need health leaders to help with that. Do you want to be a health leader? It starts with you. That's what this model was. So we decided to build Choctaw women health leaders, and we start with their own behaviors that they want to work on and change, and we move into teaching community organizing skills so that they can begin to become literally leaders at the community level to respond. So for example, ideally, and this didn't quite happen, and we're hoping to have this happen later, but ideally these become health societies. And that, so if there's a substance, let's say there's an overdose in one community, and we know, or suicide, that we know there tends to be clusters, those two things cluster together. So the White Crane women would be responsible for calling all the other White Crane women to come over and do a community event to help do community protection for free. It doesn't cost any money to do that. But what we did do is give them, after going through this 12-week program, we did give them a pot of money that they can organize with each other or with others to create a sustainable health event at their community level. And the Walking Warriors is a good example. They're online, if you ever see them. It was started from this program, from Yappalli. And so we built a program, we got funded by NIH to test this, to see if this works. 150 Choctaw women from our tribal districts with that health leadership model. A 10-day walk. At the end of that walk, after the 12-week curriculum, we go on that 10-day walk. And that walk is rewalking the Trail of Tears. It's then that everything comes into play. I have to tell you, it's being on the land that makes all the difference. And the idea is that that's a vow-making ceremony, that they're making a commitment to step into the role of being a community leader. They are received by their communities when we are done, when we walk into the community after the walk, and there's a big feast that the community holds for them, recognizing them, and their families are super proud of them. And these are the questions that guide our curriculum. It's really simple. What kind of ancestor did my ancestors envision me to be? What kind of ancestor do I want to be? What kind of ancestor do I envision future generations to be through my actions today? And did it change? Yeah. I can't give you all the details of that because we're still vetting it through our tribal folks, but it was really positive. And just to give you some of the qualitative examples that we have already released, community families were dealing with like having 2 cases of soda a day to now having none. People went from no more than 1,000 steps a day to some of them are walking 10 miles and even doing marathons now. Even our pilot study women, 2 of the women who are the leaders lost 65 pounds each, and they've kept it off 12 years later. So there's something about being on the land and recommitting to this vision of love and life, and they even say it here, I'm thankful to have a greater purpose. It gave me an even a greater purpose to realize, hey, my ancestors came here. They didn't have diabetes. That was the other conversation the women said. We don't have to have diabetes, right? No. They didn't have all these conditions, so that's not something that we just are destined to have. That's something that can be changed. Another person said, well, with me, it did help me to get a better perspective, to eat healthier, to focus on a healthier living lifestyle. I've gotten involved with the bike team. I have gotten involved with different fitness challenges, not just for myself, but for my family. My family is my number one priority. If I don't take care of myself, then I don't show them how they should take care of themselves. then that was the main thing to help me to find a sense of myself. And so I'm going to end there and just say, thank you, Yakoke, for the opportunity to share this with you. Really appreciate it, and hopefully inspired you to think about shifting your paradigm shift in terms of developing health promotion interventions. I've worked in communities where I've told them that we rewalk the Trail of Tears. They're like, but what's the research? I said, that was the research. And the other communities have taken that on. Homa Nation did that recently. They took this model and created a diabetes program by recommitting and rewalking and re-canoeing some of their passages and going to sacred sites. So communities are starting to take this up. So thank you.
We have some time for a Q&A if anyone has questions for Karina.
Don't be shy.
I'm wondering, there's a new book by Kara Page and Erica Woodland called Healing Justice Lineages, and I'm wondering, it was a framework that was developed in the South of the United States and the global South, and it's supposed to be based on Indigenous decolonization, Black liberation, and led by Black, Brown, Indigenous people of color, and based on traditional healing methods, lineages, ancestral. And I'm just wondering if you have worked with any of those folks? Or?
No, I haven't, but now I want to go read that.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. This is why I like interdisciplinary opportunities.
Well, first, just let me say I am so inspired by this work, and it's really, I rarely listen to something and feel like, oh my gosh, if only the world could be filled with more of this. So, thank you. But it also raises a question for me. You're going to the National Institutes of Health, which is, the hub of the biomedical model that likes to find germs and genes. And I wonder if you've thought, you should probably, I'm sure you've thought, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts about bringing, working in the heart of the NIH and what it'll be like to be there, and also your thoughts about the extent to which, this is very specific to communities, to Native communities, but quite honestly, what you're saying to me feels like what would work for
a lot of communities.
Yeah, would work for a lot of communities. And so thus, I wonder if you've thought about, and this is a much longer conversation, again, about, NIH has really privileged not this kind of approach over its history. And do you see a moment now where any openings are there? What your visions?
Hired me.
They hired.
They
Yes,
kind of know what they're getting.
Yes, and anyway.
I hope. Anytime it's the same thing. First let me just say I've almost all my research has been funded by NIH. So sometimes and it's understandable why we do this, but we put up our own barriers because I have found that part of the skill set is learning to be bilingual, I guess. So being able to be very centered in understanding Indigenous thought and processes that need to be on the ground, and then being able to translate that in a way that a non-native audience can begin to go, aha, oh, okay, I can see those connections, and learning how to do that in a way that allows us to carry out the work that is meaningful and credible at the community level, while also is scientifically credible at the scientific level. And it is a skill set. And it sometimes feels like, you have to, it's hard to do, but it can be done. And I found people to be more open than people sometimes think. But it depends what study section you might go to as well. So there's some elements there to that. In terms of my role, I mean, I hope to be able to, I think because I'm at the late stage of my career, and I'm not, I haven't, my goal was not to be a forever fed. And my goal is to ensure that Indigenous communities are served well in being able to address their health inequities and hopefully get rid of it as much as possible. And doing that through science that's culturally credible and meaningful and relevant by and for our communities. So I see my role as being very active in helping facilitate that happening. But that means a lot of schmoozing on my part because I have to get all the 27 institutes to climb on board with some of the issues that we think are most relevant and important to address. So I've found people generally have been pretty responsive. They don't always understand. People don't always understand or get it. That's okay. You know, when we are able to produce work that really demonstrates change and success, that's powerful. I mean, you can do qualitative research through the NIH as well. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I'm older now. I say more what's on my mind in a good way. But I hope to push some of those boundaries. It's going to be like going back to my early days at Columbia when I was the only Native faculty there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in the interactions between the youngest and the oldest members of the folks who were doing the walking, who were on the trail.
Yes.
And the abilities to hear and communicate with each other, and some of the ways that you could tell us some more about that.
You know what, the youth were amazing, and can I say that two of the youth that were with us have now gone on to get, one is just finishing her MPH right now. She was 12 when she went with us on this. And the other one just finished he's finishing his PhD right now in leadership, and human development and leadership. So they literally said they were inspired by being on the trail and having that experience. That was really amazing. The kids were fantastic to have on the trail because they ask questions and they don't edit, especially by day 4. No one's editing anymore. And they don't edit, and that brings a lens to the situation that was really important. We had a little bit of a harrowing experience with one young woman who kind of had a spiritual thing happen that she's never experienced before, and frightened her. And we worked with her about it and talked with her about it. But what she got out of that experience was, she said, "Okay, I get it," because basically. Best way to describe it is she put out a spirit plate, which is the typical we do. We're trying to socialize the young people about how to do certain things and learn along the way. Since then, we don't do this anymore because the power of that trail is pretty intense. But she put out a spirit plate saying, "I'm here to help," and she got visited, basically spiritually in a way that scared her. But out of that experience, she realized. She summed everything up that we were trying to do. We were sitting there with her, and I said, sometimes, sometimes these kinds of things happen to young people so that they can tell adults. So now we have the story. So we know what to do to take care of that. You just need to just be you right now, the young person. And the next day she woke up and she said, "I get it now. As long as I'm just a happy, healthy kid, I'm healing future generations." And I was like, done. We are done. That's all we needed. And she got it. So the kids got it. Young man Kai, he still talks about original instructions, and he does that all the time in his leadership work that he does. So the young people, they got it in a way faster in some ways than us curmudgeon-y people who are set in our ways on the trail and trying to power through it. And the other interesting thing I want to highlight is we're not all of one mind as Choctaw people. And what that really showed, we had younger people who are young Choctaw people who are, different levels of development in terms of identity even, and Choctaw knowledge. And so I remember saying to one of my colleagues who was younger, I said, "I wouldn't sit there, you're gonna get lots of triggers." "Oh, I'm fine." I said, "All right." And then sure enough, she got all bit up and so it was interesting the different experiences some of us had developmentally. So that actually helped me understand that when we take, we're very different. We're all different people in our tribe. People have different levels of cultural knowledge. And so we had to create an intervention that could hold all of that and be prepared for that. We're not all of one mind, the young people all wanted to go to this one place, that place where we got spiritually visited by some folks, wanted to go to this one place, and us, the olders, myself and two others said, nah, I don't really like this place, I don't like the vibe here, don't like it. And the youngers are like, come on, it's fine. And sure enough that night, oh geez, it was pretty wild. And, so it was important to realize and embrace that we're going to have very different experiences. We may all be Choctaw, but we all have very different understandings of what that means to us. And that was really good. Yeah.
What one-off walk, or
No.
is this something that is ongoing? That
It's
there's
ongoing. Yeah, we do
lots
it.
of groups coming and walking again and
We walk it every year with a
with
project.
different people.
Yeah, no, we haven't opened it up to other folks yet. We were testing it to see how it was working, and we've done that over 7 years with this particular project, and we did 2 walks prior to that as well. But we are talking about opening it up to non-Choctaws to see if other people want to be part of that experience and kind of learn from that. So we are talking about doing that. Our tribe still wants us to continue it, and we're continuing it in the form of Wakaya this year. We just got funded from NIH to do this as well. It's a 5-year study and to look at this for youth, and it's both male and female Two-Spirit youth who can go on that walk with us and go on that journey, and that's really exciting. And the other piece I should say in terms of sustainability, you hope your tribe takes this stuff up when you do this work. And it's kind of cool. Our chief actually loved what we were doing so much that he actually requires new leadership, tribal leadership, when they come in, tribal administration. He wants them to go out with us for a weekend on the trail and ask those questions about what kind of a leader are you going to be? What kind of ancestor are you going to be? So it's being taken up into the tribal level, which is really important for sustainability. But I'll let you know if we do some trail walks. Yeah. And people are doing other things like this, like Cherokee Nation does walks now, and they do a bike trail.
My question, it's not really a question. It's just thinking about the possibilities for including settlers and the relationality between like settlers and natives to something like
Man,
this. So
that's deep, yes.
so settlers have to also take on the violence that their ancestors have contributed to contemporarily and historically, right? So as a way to incorporate this sort of
Yes.
practice to address settler colonialism from...
The healing is mutual, but we all have to heal. When we did our first, our 3 non-native, or 3 white folks who came with us as helpers on the trail, they had also a very different experience. They kind of spun out a little bit. One of them did in particular. What the trail taught us is that whatever you still need to work on, it pulls it right up for you to look at. And that colonial stuff came out. As a matter of fact, at one point, this is like day 7, we're exhausted and tired, and she comes up to me and said, "Oh, I figured it out. I figured out why I'm here. I'm here to save you." And she didn't even realize, she was like, and I said, let's just keep that between us right now. And she can laugh about it later. She's like, I don't know why I said that. I said, because you needed to clean yourself, literally. On the trail, you just cleaned yourself, and that's good. I mean, that bubbled up, and we needed to see that. I didn't want everyone else to see it. I think I would have had an issue at hand, but we were able to talk it through a little bit, and afterwards we'd have a kind of some movement forward in that direction. But that trail does that, and we've had non-native people who come on the trail, and if they're not properly, white people I should say in particular, especially if they're from Oklahoma, if their relationship has always been in a kind of I'm protecting, I'm helping out in a way that's, I'm giving of myself to you, but it's not really mutual, and these folks have a very hard time, and they get undone on the trail because they see the women starting not to need them anymore and becoming really, and so I remember this one woman said, why are we talking about, historical trauma? Why are we talking about that? And I'm like, you don't need to worry about that right now. We're like, well, this is for the women to talk about. But people literally, one woman was driving a van around. I'm like, okay, she's gone bananas driving the van around. We got to get her settled down. So we had to realize that we needed to do better work in preparing our white allies, who, especially from Oklahoma, if they've lived in the community for a long time, they don't realize they have a relationship until they get there and see the shift. And then they feel unmoored because they've been defined in a certain way in relation to Native people. And then now that line's been cut, it's like they get unmoored. And it's you literally physically see it. I should do a paper on that. But the healing part is that how can we take that and say, hey, let's look at that. Let's have a different relationship now. What would that look like if your friend here doesn't need you in this way? What really does that look like? How can you join together to make a better world? Because we're living together, How do we do that? So that's an excellent point. So we haven't done that yet, but it needs to be done. Any other thoughts? Oh, and also someone over here. Okay. I'm over here. And there's a person over here who has a question too.
I have so many questions. I'm going to try to just ask one. I wanted to ask a question that picked up on Anila's comment and then what you just said. In thinking about the significance of the land to this process, I had a lot of thoughts during your talk, and one of them is there's been this kind of conversation in California around fire and native practices related to the land, right?
The burning, yeah.
Yes, but this kind of idea that if we could only just take this part and then it would protect us from fire. And I was thinking about what might broader land-based, more substantive land-based interventions look like that are both include native populations and settlers. I'm just trying to think about what might that look like as a model, right? When the community is larger, more fraught. Yeah.
I would say we have to start first with our Indigenous people, because to activate that relational way of healing, I think it's helpful for us to first have our own relational activation going here first, and then we can move out this way. And because then you have a place of center. You understand, your relational way of being. Otherwise, we end up taking care of settlers under those conditions. We do the emotional work or hold the emotional space. So we need to have our own emotional place, and then to then be able to join. At least that's my observation. I do think it would be great, especially with climate change and the impact of climate change, to think bigger. Because all of us as human beings are being impacted by this on this planet, and droughts, fire, whole villages are getting relocated right now up in Alaska. We have some, unearthing potentially hazardous things that are going to impact climate as well. So it'll be interesting to see what we could do. I don't know, I don't have an answer for that right now, but I think it's really food for thought that we can, we have to do this together. We're going to create a better planet and better, healthier society. My health is dependent on your health. So.
That's a great question, and kind of similar to one I wanted to ask earlier, so I'm glad we checked that off. I was, maybe just to continue that, the Washoe tribe has been given lots of land to sort of remanage around the Tahoe Basin, Meeks Bay, and one of the questions I had was, what's the best way to support them as a non-native? And I guess your answer is go to them and ask them.
Exactly.
So,
Say, how can I be of support?
Right.
And it might be, days that, it might be contributions, it could be financial, it could be fiscal,
Right.
it could be, going out and helping with the land on days that they have certain clearings and support. So just ask.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I'm here to be an ally, and, I don't know anything about this, but, if there's a way I could be of support, I'm here. Here's my name and number, and,
Yeah, super. And then the second question I was going to ask has to do with your walks. I was wondering, do you ever do them bidirectionally, and do you expect that you would learn different things in another direction?
So interesting you should ask that. We had the big debate before we went on this. Our fantasy, it was so interesting. Our fantasy was, we'll start in the motherland. We'll start at Nanawaya in Mississippi, and then we'll go this way. And as we did archival research and we did all of this stuff, we realized we're Oklahoma Choctaws now. And it was actually a really important shift for us to make. And we consciously made the decision to start spending the night first in Oklahoma to acknowledge our relationship to our new land, then go to basically either Memphis or Vicksburg, but usually we go to Memphis area, and then start our walk going in, crossing the Mississippi. There's something about crossing that Mississippi that needs to happen. And it was interesting to give you an idea of the power of realizing how we're really Oklahoma Choctaw now is there's a trail song that a part of it that still exists that they sang for us when we went across the river. And the song basically says, when you cross the great water, I cry, And so we had the song and we had the rhythm of the song. And we thought, gee, wouldn't it be neat if the rest of the song, because most of our songs have four parts to them. And so we thought, what if we can get the other three parts? Maybe it'll be a new healing song. Maybe it'll be a new way of singing now. And it didn't come until the last 3 days. And it came from the kids, the youth. Day 3, the second line came. Day 2, the second line came. Our day walking in. And the song ended with, I see the red earth, I see the red earth, saying, I see Oklahoma, and I cry for joy. And the kids came up with it, and that was really powerful. But doing it bidirectionally, we're talking about working with Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians to do this as well. But they have a very different relationship to what happened with the Trail of Tears. And we're talking about like rewalking Natchez Trace and other ancient areas, but we're even talking about, do we then bring us all together and talk about being one fire or being connected again in that way, and bringing some of the Yappalli women from Oklahoma with the Yappalli women from Mississippi Band together. Start reconnect. Mississippi said it'd be nice to start reconnecting those relationships because you guys left and we don't. You're like a foreign tribe. And it also, the other thing we found out that we left. We kind of, a lot of us had integrated this, internalized this kind of the erasure narrative, which was we left. We were the sellouts who left and left our land and left our people. And really, when we looked at, we knew that wasn't true, but there's a party that kind of felt like that, and we kind of get harassed that way sometimes in community. And really, when we found out, we actually have the paper, like the statements that our leaders said at Dancing Rabbit Creek, and said things like, basically, we would sooner die than give up our right to be Choctaw, because that's what the Article 14 of the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek was requiring of us. If we stayed in Mississippi, we would no longer be Choctaw. We would just become citizens of the state of Mississippi. And we are the ones who said, absolutely not, that's non-negotiable. And so we were forced to leave. Now, that's not to say those who stayed behind all agreed to that point of view either. They were horribly treated, horribly. I mean, houses taken over and their crops burned and their cattle taken and chased into the hills. So they didn't get their promise either. So they were supposed to get their land, certain land back.
I want to say thank you for your presentation. It was really, like I said, historical trauma more than just this. It's also.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
And moving away from the idea of these more than perpetual.
Right. Right.
And recognizing now, as Native, as an Indigenous person, that, yeah, this is what we're dealing with, and these are the interventions that were coming up. But also on a much bigger scale, whether you're from climate or just the world and how connected we are, how fragile and how beautiful, how sweet it all is. And if we're looking at it just like the way I think that this is what I got to do.
Yeah.
No, there's another way to see this. I really like that reframe. So beautiful work. I can listen to you tell you stories forever. So thank you.
Thank you. But you remind me, it's important that we are not defined by historical trauma. We're not defined. And part of the settler colonial thinking is when I hear young people say, try to outdo their authenticity challenges by how oppressed they are. And I'm like, what? Is that what's defining you? I said, you've just given yourself away. I said, you know, your ancestors' love and vision and teachings, that's what should be, that helps to define you, not these events. These events happen to our people, it's real. But diabetes shouldn't define us. So that was the aha moment when the women said, we don't have to have diabetes. We could just reject this altogether. So it's that narrative, that story, that's restoring our lives, I think is so important. And it's constant because settler colonial pressure is always around. So
This will be our last.
yeah.
Yakoki, Chatosio-oke. Thank you so much for inhabiting this space. I was curious, we are a really diverse tribe, so how did folks bring their multiple identities to the trail with them?
Yes.
I know I have both settler and colonial
I do too.
ancestry as well as
Yes.
Choctaw, and so
Yep.
how do people inhabit that space?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, I would say that, you know, people really, we accepted people where they're at and whatever that means to them, right? So that's the reason why we had very different experiences at first. So regardless of how much settler blood or not they had, that almost didn't matter as much as how culturally connected were they. And if they were if they knew their language, or if they were culturally connected to their parents, and they had a way of frame of understanding themselves in relation to what it means to be Choctaw in this world, those folks had a very different experience than people who are like absolutely, you know, didn't really have a connection, you know, have a card but didn't really have a connection. We hope to create a place where everyone begins to come forward and begin to say, what does that mean to me? How am I? Who were my ancestors? Who am I? One of the most powerful things, especially for the younger people, is when they start to, you go and hold a commutation paper from your ancestor, all of a sudden you have a different understanding of why you're here. You're like, for me, and I'm like, I turned 59 yesterday. You know, I hold that commutation paper now, and I still would makes my heart cry, because I'm like, but it's also love. It's that sweetness, right? I'm like, did he know that I'd be sitting here one day holding his commutation paper? He made that walk so I could be here. So it doesn't matter that I got Welsh. I hope I go and investigate someday my Welsh ancestry. That's kind of cool. I'd like to know that. But you know how I understand my own identity in relation to that is that commutation paper and what I owe. I have to pay it forward. Yeah. So, but we create a space where people are free to be whoever they are and what they bring in that situation. You know, whether you're white settler or African American and Choctaw, whatever. You know, we're all here as Choctaw today. We don't say, you know, you got to keep that toe out because you know that's your other one. We say bring your whole self in, and but you're still being Choctaw today. Yeah. So Yakoke, thank you for that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.